and today I'll be talking about therapy and Star Trek. So I guess I'll talk about kind of like who I am, and then talk about my journey to where I am in a lot of different senses. So my name is Leanne. I'm from Seattle. I went to the University of Washington, where I majored in aeronautical and astronautical engineering. I minored in diversity there. And now I'm in Ann Arbor in the lovely state of Michigan. I'm a PhD candidate in the aerospace department at the University of Michigan. And the lab I work in is called the Plasma Dynamics and Electric Propulsion Laboratory, which is a mouthful, so we call it PEPL. A couple of my hobbies, I love my cat. As you can see, this is Pudge. She's very sweet. She's in the room right now. She's not listening to me. I also like swimming and kickboxing, and I embroider in my free time, so you can see my family dog when she was stuck in a cone up here in the corner. So what do I do? So I work on plasmas. Just a quick intro kind of to what plasmas are. Plasmas are considered like the fourth state of matter. So as you keep adding energy to different phases, you go from a solid to a liquid to a gas. And then if you keep adding energy to a gas, you'll end up with a plasma. You can think of plasma as like a soup of charged particles, kind of. You'll have ions and electrons and neutrals in there. And there's a lot of different types of plasma in the world around us that we actually interact with on a regular basis. So you can see in this little diagram, my lab mates and I have an ongoing argument about whether or not fire counts as a plasma, but all of these other ones I think are pretty strictly, in that realm. I specifically work on electric propulsion. So this is kind of in contrast to your traditional chemical propulsion, where instead of getting energy from breaking chemical bonds, we get it from electric and magnetic fields. What this means is that we get higher specific impulse, which is kind of a metric of efficiency, but much lower thrust. So electric propulsion is traditionally used for in-space travel, since we don't have enough thrust to get out of Earth's gravitational well, but we do have enough efficiency to be able to travel long distances in space. So I work on Hall thrusters, which is a specific type of electric propulsion device. Without getting into the weeds, basically you have an electric field that'll accelerate your ions out that actually produces thrust. And then the interaction between the magnetic and the electric field, I wrote cross between magnetic field, there should be an and the electric field, traps electrons in the channel, and they kind of get eaten by the neutrals as they pass through and result in ions. Here's a fun video, I guess, to entertain everyone while I try to talk through the rest of what I do. There's a recent development in Hall thruster technology called magnetic shielding. And this shapes the magnetic field inside the channel so that we have a significant reduction in the erosion. So this really extends the lifetimes of these devices. This has also changed the plasma properties in ways that we don't fully understand yet. So this is one of the things I'm looking at. My main focus, though, is on krypton operation. So the traditional propellant for Hall thrusters in most of electric propulsion in general is xenon, which is the heaviest non-radioactive noble gas. But krypton is a cheaper and lighter alternative. So xenon's really expensive. I know there was like a 2-week test where they spent $100,000 just on xenon. So you can imagine that, when you're trying to validate something for hundreds of hours of lifetime in space and you're trying to test that same amount of time on Earth, it ends up being really expensive. So krypton is a great alternative, but there's a lot of problems with it. As you can kind of see in this video, when it lights up, there's all these sparks coming out from the cathode, which is the central part. That shouldn't be there. So there's a lot of issues with krypton operation. Performance isn't as great, but it gives me a job, so that's fun. So there's a little intro on what I do. And so now we'll talk about how I got here. So this is my little visualization for my journey, my academic journey. So the first step, high school, straightforward enough. I went to Redmond High School. I was on the robotics team. I got really into Star Trek. This is a little picture I got signed by Nichelle Nichols, who plays Uhura on the original Star Trek, and she's like my hero. I also really got into stargazing, just super interested in space, thought it was very cool. And so going into college, I kind of knew that I wanted to do something with space, or at least in the engineering spacey realm. So how do I click next? Oh, I broke it. No, it's fine. Okay, so here I am in high school. These little asteroids are kind of, some of the challenges during and between high school and college. There's AP tests, there's college apps. I actually did a program where I started college early. So this was a lot easier for me. You can see it's a little small asteroid. I imagine for some people it's a very large asteroid. I only had one college application, so that was great. And then, once in college, applying for my major and everything was hard, but, I made it there. So I was an undergrad at the University of Washington, as I said. I was a research assistant in the Fusion Z-pinch experiment laboratory. So this kind of starts getting into what I was talking about with, I had interest in engineering and also in space. And so this was kind of at the intersection there. So I got to work with plasmas, and specifically fusion plasma, which is a little different from what I work on now. It's traditionally used for, it's a lot higher density, and it's traditionally used for energy. But it was a great experience, and it really got me kind of hands-on experience with both plasmas and also just the research environment. While I was there, I majored in aerospace, as I mentioned. I made a lot of great friends, a lot of whom I'm still friends with now and are off doing super cool stuff. And I learned a lot about planes, which has not been useful in my personal life, but I also learned a lot about plasmas, which has been very useful. My final senior project, which you can see here, is a little plasma actuator thing that we stuck on a rocket. This was actually made the year after I was there. We didn't get this far while I was there, but they still credit me on all of their PowerPoints, so I feel pretty good about that. I also minored in diversity because, obviously I don't look like a lot of the other people in engineering. And so I think it's really important to be aware of why that's the case and how to improve that. And I'm really glad that, I did that, and I got to take a lot of classes that I probably wouldn't have taken otherwise. And I think it was a great experience. So I'm now orbiting. The more I look at this, the more I'm like, this is a ridiculous metaphor. Now I'm orbiting one of the moons of college, which is an internship. So I worked at Eagle Harbor Technologies in the summer of 2016. So this would have been after my sophomore year. So this is a company that does pulse power systems. It has applications in a lot of fields. When I kind of started, it was mostly, I mostly just was soldering for a month. But then I got this really cool project, which was an atmospheric pressure nanosecond pulsed plasma jet, also an absolute mouthful. But basically, it was a small grant through NASA to this company where they were designing and building these little atmospheric pressure plasma jets used for spacecraft sterilization. So you can see my low quality Snapchat picture over here. But basically, we ran gas through these tubes and then ionized them, and then the interaction with organic compounds on the surface of, a satellite or something you wanted to send out into space would sterilize it. So this was also a great experience. I really enjoyed working with plasmas. I just think they're super cool. I also realized that, I was really interested in electric propulsion. And so that kind of brings me to the next moon, which is Aerojet Rocketdyne. So I worked here the summer after my junior year. I always called it a PEEP. I was a project engineer in electric propulsion as an intern. So there was a couple of different responsibilities. I monitored tests, I documented changes, updated old documentation, and it was great to get exposure to the field of electric propulsion like this. And there's actually a number of people who I worked with at Aerojet Rocketdyne that I'm still kind of regularly working with now as someone who works in an EP lab. It was a great opportunity. So yeah, great opportunity to meet people. But kind of one of my main takeaways was honestly that I was much more interested in research rather than industry, at least at this point. I really enjoy kind of being part of the whole process from beginning to end, like what I talked about with my previous internship, where I kind of got to design this system. We took apart a milling machine, and then we stuck in a little bunch of tubes, and then we made plasma. And so it's very cool to, design, build, test. And so I kind of left this internship knowing that I loved electric propulsion, but I wanted to do something more kind of academic. And I was also definitely just intellectually interested in plasmas, plasma physics, and electric propulsion. So the next couple of challenges here, this is just a few, right? There's way more than these. there's coursework in college. College is hard. There's just no way getting around it. Grad school lab's also hard. And then changing relationships with friends and family, just, people change over the course of undergrad. I moved across the country from undergrad to grad school. And so obviously there were a lot of friends who it's a lot harder to keep in contact with now than it was before, and same with my family. But we made it. So now I'm here at graduate school. So I started in 2018. I don't know when I will finish. Nominally it's 2023, but we'll see. So I'm now a PhD candidate, which is great. I was a PhD pre-candidate, which meant that I hadn't passed my qualifying exams yet. And studying for that is truly one of the most difficult things I've done. But, it paid off, and I survived. I survived all the coursework. It was really hard. I cried in my car a lot, but I had a lot of great friends, and, that really helped me get through. And now I'm doing some really cool stuff. So I research, and I do operate Hall thrusters, current operation on magnetically shielded Hall thrusters, which I kind of talked about before. But one thing I really like about grad school is that, it sounds like an extremely specific field, and it is, it's like 3 levels down of specificity, but the actual skills I use and the things that I learn on a daily basis are actually across like a really broad spectrum. So you kind of see like these little bubbles here, the different types of things I do on a daily basis. Sometimes all at once, which can be overwhelming, but hopefully not necessarily all at once. So yeah, grad school is a great fit for me. Like I said, I like being part of the whole process. I like, knowing that it's cool because a lot of these problems, it's like no one has solved them before. So no one knows the answer, which is really stressful sometimes, but it's also very cool to know that you're like pushing the boundary of human knowledge, essentially. I'm an experimentalist, so this means I actually get to run Hall thrusters in the lab, which I love doing. I think it's extremely cool. And it's also very self-motivated, but you also work with a lot of other people. And I think, for me, again, personally, that was a great fit. So grad school, definitely something to consider if people are considering it. So, this is my journey. You can see it's fairly straightforward, honestly. I did a couple of internships. I went to a couple of schools, and that's where I got to where I am. So the next journey I'm going to talk about is my mental health journey, which, as you will see, is not at all going to be the same kind of journey. So first of all, what you might notice is that the asteroids are huge and the planets are very small, because I think, at least for me, like the journey towards finding resources for mental health and then, being able to actually get to them was a lot more difficult, or at least a lot less straightforward than my journey through kind of academia and professionally. So the biggest one I would say is social and cultural stigma just around mental health in general. Some of the things that, I definitely experienced, and I know a lot of other people experience as well, is where mental illness is like not seen as a real issue because, oh, like your leg isn't broken, so why are you sad? Or like, it's all in your head, which, yes, that's the problem. It is in my head, which it turns out has a lot of influence over how I feel. And I think, there's a lot of other things that are very specific to different people. My parents both immigrated here from China, and, for the cultural background that they're from, it definitely is almost seen as a sign of weakness to ask for help for things like these. And, people coming from different cultural backgrounds will have different barriers to things like these. But what's important to remember is that everyone has mental health. Like, you don't need to be really struggling just to seek out help. Like, you can just be feeling kind of down and be like, I should go, ask a friend for help or start thinking about therapy or something like that. So, some of the obstacles just to asking for help is finding resources, like knowing who to ask, finding the time making time for things like this. And yeah, asking for help can be really scary. I think it's super important to build up a support network of people around you who you trust and who care about you, and, making sure that's a two-way street. Emotional vulnerability is super underrated, in my opinion. I used to always think like, I think especially as a kid, it was definitely like, oh, showing emotion is weak, but like showing emotion is hard, and it's like brave to do, honestly. It's way harder than just locking everything up. So I think, it's really good to develop these skills because it kind of helps change thoughts like, I feel terrible all the time and I don't know what to do, to actually saying out loud to someone like, hey, I've been feeling kind of down. Is it cool if I vent to you? And if, the people around you are not as sensitive as or understanding as you would hope, then not to say like ditch your friends and get new ones, but also maybe consider, becoming friends with people who are going to be understanding of the struggles that you're going through. And so many more giant asteroids, lack of knowledge, finding resources, cost. And this is specific to our next destination, which is therapy. And as you can see, like some of the old asteroids are still here as well. So some of the things that I'm talking about here with like lack of knowledge, it's hard to, if you know that there's like something wrong with you, but you don't know what it is, it can be really stressful. So this is kind of what I went through, because it was like, I'm always worrying what's wrong with me. And then when I got a diagnosis that like, you have anxiety, it was like, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And the same thing with depression, where I would be like, I can't get out of bed. It's because I'm lazy and bad. And then realizing later, like, no, it's just a chemical imbalance in my brain that I can't help that gives me depression. And it can be really scary, to go through these things and feel like no one else has experienced them. And so going through, talking to friends, I realized like in my first year of grad school, how many of my friends have mental illnesses. It is so many. It's like all of them, like all of us are out here. And then kind of looking them up online can be really helpful as well, though, always be careful what you read. It's not all going to be trustworthy. And then finding resources is just hard, especially, I was talking to one of my friends about this the other day, but it can be so hard when you're like, I want to get help for the fact that I have no initiative, but I have no initiative to ask for that help. Or, I need to be organized to keep track of my ADHD medication, but I'm taking that medication because I'm not organized. So it can be really hard. And I think it requires a lot of tenacity and patience. And a single bad experience can be really discouraging. I went to therapy once in high school and it was really bad. And I didn't try again until like junior year of college. And, it's also hard with insurance. It can be really scary and confusing. So a couple of good starting points, I would say, if you're in college, going to like the university health services, in my experience, they tend to be underfunded, but filled with really great people. There's also like online resources. And I think the culture is really shifting where, people are talking about this more, which is great. So there should be more kind of things online than there used to be. And then when you do find a therapist, make sure to do an intake appointment. I think of it as like a vibe check, basically, to make sure that, you kind of mesh with the person you're talking to. Obviously, you're not going to be like best friends on the first session because you've never talked to this person before. And now you're trying to tell them your entire life story, and everything that you struggle with every day. But it's still good to make sure that you're at least comfortable, that you could see yourself developing that kind of relationship. So we get to therapy. Therapy is for everyone. You don't need to have something wrong with you to go to therapy. Even if there is something wrong with you, that's fine. There's many things wrong with me and I'm in therapy. That's why. So here are some memes that I talk about with my therapist pretty frequently, honestly. And, therapy is only one method of treatment for mental health. It's one that's been extremely helpful for me, which is why I'm talking about it so much. But, other things that you can do, physical and mental health are really linked together. As much as it always bugs me when people are like, oh my God, why are you so depressed? You should try yoga. Like if I could cure my depression with yoga, I would constantly be in downward dog, like just my laptop on the ground. But it still matters. And so knowing that, keeping that in mind, making sure that you're in a situation in life as much as you can where, you're happy and safe and fulfilled. Meditation honestly hasn't worked great for me, but I know a lot of people who it's worked great for. And I'm on medication, which is its own kind of can of worms, and there's its own stigma around that and everything. But knowing that it's an option is, I think, really important. So during and beyond therapy, there's much more challenges. So, as I was kind of talking about, there's different treatments, there's different types of therapists. There's like art therapy and music therapy. There's, I can't remember the acronyms, but there's a bunch of different acronyms for the type of like thought experiments they have you go through to try to improve your mental health. Something that I recently, I think especially found really important was finding a therapist who has a similar identity as me. As an Asian American woman in engineering, there's a lot of things that are really specific kind of to my lived experience that someone who's white might not understand. And it's not that they can't sympathize, but it's nice having someone who knows what I'm going through because they've lived it as well. I always feel bad when I switch therapists a little. I'm always like, I'm not giving you a bad review. This just isn't working. It feels really like a breakup, and it can take a while to find a great fit, but I think it's really worth it. And it's been really, really helpful for me. Another weird thing I've experienced is like imposter syndrome with being mentally ill almost, where I'm like, oh, I'm not that depressed. I don't need to go to therapy. But again, everyone has mental health. If you can do it and it's helpful for you, even if it's just a bit, you might as well. I think of it as like brain exercise. Like you wouldn't be like, oh, I'm in shape now. I'm not going to keep going to spin class every week. It's like, I'm in shape. I'm going to keep in shape by going to spin class every week. That's kind of how I treat therapy. And then also just destigmatizing the whole thing in whatever communities you're in to whatever ability you have. And so that's, this journey is a lot more little loop-de-loops, it was a lot harder to get through. But, I don't know that I would really say I'm at the point of acceptance and advocacy. I think it's always an ongoing struggle. But I like to think that I'm at least trying to work to that point. And I think, so that's most of, these are my journeys, my two separate journeys that are actually very much interlinked and were kind of happening at the same time. If you want to get in touch with me, I can talk about therapy for literally hours. I can also talk about plasmas for literally hours. So feel free to reach out to me. This is my school email, my Instagram, my website, which has more fun videos and stuff on it and more information about my lab. And thanks for listening. Go to therapy. Therapy is for everyone. Obviously, you don't have to go to therapy, but I hope that at least this kind of opens, I know there's a lot of taboo and like stigma around it. So I hope this kind of opens people's eyes to what it can do for you. So if anyone has questions. Oh, there's a chat. Okay, let me look at the chat. Okay, oh boy, all right. Okay, I will read through these. Yes, finding a therapist that's a good match can be really difficult. It is stressful. Do all women in STEM have imposter syndrome? I think a lot of people do. I think talking about it helps just in getting rid of it. I totally agree. Like, it's a weird thing to talk about. I think this is my personal opinion. So, take this with a grain of salt. But I think like when you're the only woman in a room full of men, it can be really hard to try to like, the instinct is to try to blend in, you want to be like one of the guys, or you're not like other girls. And I think that's a really toxic mentality to have. And I think, this applies to a lot of different identity factors, like people who are queer in STEM. Like oftentimes the instinct is to like hide what makes you different. And I think the imposter syndrome, there's actually research that's been done on this about how, if there's one woman in a room full of men taking a test, she'll do worse on average than if it was an equal gender split. And so I think, I don't know that all women in STEM have imposter syndrome, but I think all women in STEM are at least susceptible to it. And I think talking about it and acknowledging it really helps in like fighting it. What programs did I do in high school? I did robotics. I honestly didn't do too much else. Again, I did like a weird program where I started college early, so I was only in high school for 2 years. But I was on the swim team, which I really enjoyed. Robotics, and then like a couple of AP classes. Thank you so much for all of these like nice messages. And yes, going to therapy is like having a personal mentor. It's like having a fitness trainer, but again, for your brain. It's that little dumb gif I have of the brain running on a treadmill. And then how did I get research experience? That's a great question. I, as an undergrad, so my main research experience was in undergrad. So I kind of talked about that, the lab that I worked in, the Fusion Z-Pinch lab. The way I kind of got connected with that resource was first of all, I went to a mentoring meet and greet thing in the aerospace department as a freshman. I got connected with a senior who actually worked in this lab at the time. So I was chatting with her about, what she does, and it sounded super cool. And then I basically cold emailed like 8 professors, basically being like, hi, can I work for you? And honestly, that is my like number one advice for people who are interested in research. I think the previous speaker may have talked about this too, but like just cold emailing or calling people is terrifying and surprisingly effective. Like you'll get a lot of rejections, but once in a while you get an opportunity that's just great. And so that's what I did with grad school too. Like the summer before I even started applying, I reached out to a bunch of different schools that I knew did electric propulsion. And I actually got a video call with my current mentor. And it really helped, I think, like, first of all, establish my name in their brain. And second of all, just to like seek out these opportunities and, being able to actually get to them. So yeah, research experience, I think undergrad labs, great opportunity to do it. Sometimes you can get paid, sometimes you can get course credit, sometimes it's more volunteer based, but either way, you get some kind of hands-on experience and you can throw it on your resume. So that's nice. Tips for college apps. Okay, it's been a while. Tips for college apps. I am not going to lie. I don't think I'm going to be very useful for this. I applied for one college because I did that weird program, as I said, and it was like 6 years ago now for me. So I don't have any tips for college apps. I'm so sorry. I hope some other speakers will. Did I ever consider another career? I have considered many other careers. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a cartoonist and I wanted to be a writer. I kind of am a writer, but it's like academic papers, not fiction, But yeah, so definitely considered other careers. I really like where I'm at now. As I was kind of hopefully showing through my little loop-de-loop enterprise, my research journey ended up being really straightforward because I just got lucky and ended up liking a lot of the things I tried. Do I work with, I think maybe this is Professor Wass, and yes, he's the chair of the engineering or the aerospace engineering department, and I'm actually the president of the graduate student advisory committee for my department. So I work with him a lot, but I don't in terms of my research. I'm kind of in a different field. Have I ever felt hopeless about finding a therapist that I can connect with? Absolutely. It is. I'm not going to lie. I don't have great advice for this because it's just hard. Like it can just be a really hard thing, especially when, I was making that kind of joke earlier about leaving a therapist feeling like a breakup. And it's kind of the same with finding a new therapist. It's like swiping on dating apps and being like, nothing is working. And so it can definitely be frustrating. One thing that I found helpful, there's a couple of websites, I think like Psychology Today might be one of them, but you can filter by different things. And so if you try to figure out like what works for you and what doesn't. So for example, when I was looking for a new therapist, I specifically filtered for like therapists who specialize in Asian American identity because I was like, I really need that in my life right now. I moved from a place that was like 35% Asian to like 5% Asian. So it was a very stark contrast. And so it was great to kind of once I switched to that therapist, I realized like, yes, this is absolutely what I needed. So yeah, I think it just takes time. It takes effort, which again sucks because a lot of the time you don't have that kind of energy because you're struggling. I think also asking friends for help can be really useful. I've helped a lot of people who they know, I talk about therapy all the time, obviously. And so a lot of people are like, hey, I'm having trouble connecting with a therapist. Do you have any resources? And I'll send them a couple of links, or, if it's at a school specifically, I'll send them like the website. And then sometimes a lot of university mental health programs will also have someone whose specific job is to help connect people with therapists. So that's also just a really great resource to kind of keep in mind. Who specifically do you suggest to reach out to at universities? I only can really say this for grad school, but I think the best thing to do is to look for people who are PIs, principal investigators for labs that you're interested in, and then like reading through what they have on their lab, on their website, and then reaching out to the PI directly, or you can reach out to the grad students. I've been getting like a lot of emails from high schoolers or undergrads who are interested in electrical propulsion. My lab also gets like a decent amount of publicity because the stuff we do is really cool. But yeah, so I think a lot of people will, again, a lot of people might not respond. They're all super busy all the time, but